Hey, welcome everybody. This is Tracy Christensen. I'm the Member Services Manager at the Washington State Transit Insurance Pool. And we'll welcome you today to our webinar on the Human Firewall Security Awareness, done by our favorite data breach attorney, Sean Hoare with Davis Wright Tremaine. Sean has tons of data breach experience. He's worked with the FBI, Secret Service, and Homeland Security. He's been a partner at Davis Wright Tremaine the last couple of years, and we have been fortunate to have him on our network security program for the last 2.5 years. So we asked Sean to come talk to you today about what you can do to help protect your agency from data breaches. So the next voice you're going to hear is Sean Hoare with Davis Wright Tremaine.
Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate that. And it's my pleasure to be here working with my favorite agency. Hey, what we're going to talk about today are some trends, first of all, about what's happening in your digital environment. Whether you're an employee or a manager or your information technology personnel, I want you to be aware of the things that are taking place in your environment so you can better look out for yourselves, your own work, your environment, your colleagues, and your system generally. What we're seeing on a daily basis are conventional, what we call data breaches, where bad guys, malicious actors, find ways into your information system and then exfiltrate data. Oftentimes they're looking for data that they can monetize, and then many of you have what we call PCI data or payment card data in your systems, and bad guys know if they can get that, they can actually hawk or sell the payment cards on the dark web and make money. We know that oftentimes they're not just going to steal data that they can monetize like that. They may steal data that they can then use to extort money from people, but they also will steal paper, not just digital data. And so one of the most dangerous trends I see is that the small breaches where bad actors, sometimes they're addicts, will kick in a door or break a window in the middle of the night and go in to steal hard copy data. And so we're going to talk about measures you can take and actually lock that down as well as your digital data so that it's not easily monetized. And the difference being that oftentimes when hard copy data is stolen, the bad guys actually take it back to the hotel room, they're renting with that fraudulently obtained credit card, and they're monetizing your data that night. So the next day when you wake up, you might start getting alerts from your various credit card companies or banks indicating that it's used in a fraudulent fashion. We're also seeing what I call data dams. So as opposed to breaches where the back doors open up and data goes out the back door, we're looking at dams where bad guys sometimes are trying to shut down systems. And so they will flood what I refer to as your digital pipes with data, so much so that you can't communicate out, nor can you communicate internally. And it essentially takes you offline and allows you not to, it precludes you from doing any business, and it's very dangerous. We also see a variety of social engineering, and that's where malicious actors appear as someone they're not and cause somebody to open up an email or answer a phone and do certain things, open up attachments to emails, and that infects systems. One tool that they use is ransomware, and it's a malicious code that actually encrypts what we call your network share, everything attached to the device that you're using on the internet. And oftentimes it's because they sent you an email that's specifically targeted to you. It's called spear phishing, where they construct an email, a subject line, and maybe content in email because they've visited your Facebook page, your LinkedIn account, or your Twitter account, and they know who you are, what you like, what you're about, what your daily activities might be. And so they direct an email specifically to you, knowing that you're likely going to open it up. And when you do, and you click on the PDF attached to it, all of a sudden it encrypts everything associated with your device. And then at some point they try to extract money or extort money from you in order to get that data back. We also see things, what I would refer to as fraudulent money transfers, where they will spoof email addresses, causing you to believe that you're getting an email from your superior, for instance, asking for sensitive information that they would otherwise have the right within the scope of their responsibilities to ask for, and it typically would be something within the scope of your employment, and you're simply providing them what you would otherwise provide them in the regular scope of your job, but instead it's not really the CFO or the accounting supervisor or your manager asking for the money, or the information. It's actually somebody in the dark web, and we're seeing a lot of that. We're going to talk about how to prevent that. And then we're seeing malware. It's this malicious computer code that's created and disseminated for malicious purposes, typically to monetize data. And we're seeing those attacks on all sectors, all systems, including transit agencies. And if you say, no, transit agencies, we're not a target, well, yeah, you are, just like everybody else. And this screen shows you just a couple examples of reported breaches of transit agencies. And they involve a variety of exploits, whether it's malware discovered on a server where bad guys have hacked in, or maybe just a mechanical malfunction in a mail merge. Or maybe somebody didn't realize they had sensitive data on a flash drive or a CD and happened to throw it away or lose it, and all of a sudden compromised a lot of sensitive data. And sometimes we accidentally provide information to third parties, not recognizing that we're not supposed to, or that data was packed in with other non-sensitive data, and we ultimately compromise sensitive information for a lot of people. So it can happen in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's non-intentional. Sometimes it's malicious on behalf of either insider or outsiders, but it happens on a daily basis. One of the reasons it happens is that, as shown on this chart, the FBI has determined in recent years that there's a pretty extensive, sophisticated cyber underground. And this is what I used to work with the FBI, Secret Service, and Homeland Security to combat a couple of years ago when I was a cyber attorney for the Department of Justice. What we found is that in this cyber underground, sometimes they're very sophisticated, what I refer to as crime syndicates, large organizations working together with a lot of diverse skill sets within that syndicate. But sometimes there are individual actors working to sell their services. First of all, you've got online forums where the bad guys can buy and sell products or services. You have some who sell what we call bulletproof hosting, and they're dedicated servers and domain registration tools to provide vital infrastructure for hosting effective websites, hosting malware, hosting botnet command and control stations. You've also got services dealing with the monetization of data. Maybe one thing to be a coder, but you may not know how to monetize the data. So you can actually sell your ability to monetize the data, much like you can sell your ability to develop and disseminate spam botnets, or coding services to customize the malware, tailor it to specific targets, and improve the malware's ability to bypass anti-fraud mechanisms. Bad guys actually have their own antivirus systems, and so you write malicious code, you can run it through their systems to determine whether any proprietary library that's being used throughout the world will actually detect it as malware. And if it flies under their radar, you know that when it tunnels into a corporate system or a transit agency, it's not going to be detected by any antivirus library. There are a variety of other things that the bad guys do, but they all do it for a price, and they can make an awful lot of money trying to exploit your information. So I'm going to talk through a couple reasons why you should be concerned. The first is the threat's real. It happens every single day, whether it's a database hack, a point-of-sale system hack, an extortionate attack, social engineering, mobile device data theft, or burglary. The fact is the bad guys are very, very busy. They're making a lot of money at it, and they're looking to hack into your systems, steal your data, and monetize it. Another reason you should be concerned is that there's this thing called a regulatory environment. And so if, in fact, your systems are breached, you're going to be required to report that to consumers as well as possibly to regulatory agencies. Throughout the country, there are 47 different data breach notification statutes requiring notification of consumers if breaches of unencrypted information. The notification of consumers is determined by the residential location of the consumer. So, for instance, somebody may be utilizing your transit agency in Washington and use their payment card information in order to acquire your services, but may actually live in a different state. Well, if your system's breached and that payment card is accessed in that breached, you have to then respond to the data breach requirements in that other state, the state of that consumer's residence. Some require notification of state regulatory officials. As an example, in the state of Washington, as we'll see in the next slide, if more than 500 residents have to be notified because of a breach, you also have to notify the Attorney General. In other states like Massachusetts or Connecticut or New York, if you notify one individual, you also have to notify Attorneys General in those states. There are only 3 states currently that don't have data breach notification statutes. Those are Alabama, New Mexico, and South Dakota. But the trend is for states to have them, and I would expect at some point in the near future for all 50 states to have data breach notification statutes. In the state of Washington, personal information is defined as a first name or initial and last name combined with one or more of the following data sets: Social Security number, driver's license or state ID card number, or financial account with the means to access the account. So if you've got a name or first name and initial and last name and one of those data sets and it's compromised, you've got to notify the consumer. And you need to do so in the most expedient time possible, but no more than 45 days after discovery of the breach. And in Washington, it applies to both electronic and paper data. So maybe somebody lost a flash drive or somebody hacked into your system. You're going to have to notify the consumers, and if more than 500 of them are notified in Washington, the Attorney General as well, because it's an electronic data breach. But if somebody were to kick in your back door in the middle of the night and steal a bunch of files that had sensitive information that qualified as personal information under the statute, you would also have to notify that because it applies to paper data, and not all states do. It requires a notice to be in plain English, a list actually to the consumers to explain briefly what happened, how it happened, what data sets were affected, and what you're doing to prevent it from happening in the future. So we need to be working very, very closely together when this stuff happens. You need to notify your information technology personnel immediately to make sure we properly remediate to the consumers. In addition to those data breach notification statutes, you have industry regulations. The Data Security Council regulates payment card industry data security standard, and to the extent that that type of data is breached, you have to respond to their regulations and inquiries. You also may have third-party liability from consumers who get upset and file a lawsuit against you. Now, if you're not concerned about regulatory stuff or that kind of stuff, you may be concerned, how is this going to cost my business? There are first-party costs, the direct cost to your software, your hardware, your loss of income, maybe money you've lost in a ransomware attack where you paid a bad guy to get your data back. But you may also have third-party costs, and these are the lawsuit costs of third parties who allege they've been harmed, and you've got to spend money to defend yourself against them. You also have remediation costs. These may be legal services to respond to regulatory inquiries or to provide consumer notification, maybe forensic services, crisis management services, a variety of other services to consumers to remediate any possible harm done to them. You may also have to deal with fines and penalties, but the fact is your agency is likely to face one or more of these costs, but the more effective, quite frankly, you remediate to the consumer and to your system, the less likely you're going to incur some other costs, or at least they will be less than they might otherwise. But should you ever have any issue, make sure you contact WISTIP about cyber liability insurance coverage to make sure you get the full benefit of that and make sure you comply with your policies. Another reason you might want to be concerned is just think about how it might affect other employees. And this is why even if it's an unintentional compromise of sensitive information, it may really have a dramatically negative effect on other people. So you really want to be aware of your digital environment to preclude this from ever happening. How would it affect you personally? What about if your sensitive information was disclosed without your authorization? A W-2 image, for instance, going out the back door, and then having to monitor your credit to make sure that bad guys weren't taking advantage of it. Think about that stuff, and it might cause you to be a bit more aware of your digital environment. So the question is, what can you do? Now, those of us in information security know that it's clearly a marathon, not a sprint. It's a matter of taking one step at a time, but always doing everything you can to move forward, because in the digital environment, if you're not moving forward, you're moving behind, and you're getting behind very, very quickly. And it's critical you develop an information security involving three different prongs: administrative measures, technical measures, and physical measures. And then be as aware as you possibly can of your digital environment as well as your physical environment. It's one thing to keep what we think all the technical security controls in place, but if your server is completely open to it's not locked, or you've got devices that people can get into, regardless of all the other measures, your physical security is lacking, and so will be the rest. But data security isn't just an IT issue. Guarding against unauthorized access is everybody's responsibility, and it starts at the top. If you're listening to this and you're a manager, ask yourself whether you're providing the appropriate support to your IT personnel. Do they have what they need? Do they have what they need to implement the various resources they've told you that they think they need in the security controls? Have you had that conversation with your IT guy about what they're doing to protect your information, whether they have what they perceive they need? And if not, what can you do about it? If you're an employee, you're on the front line of the data security struggle. You're the human firewall. You're the person that may process payments, maintain sensitive information, or communicate on behalf of your agency. You actually hold the keys to the kingdom, and the bad guys are going to be after you because they know they may be able to access those keys through you. And even if your agency has a very robust information security system, a technical defense, hackers can still exploit it by going through you. So what you need to be aware of is identify what personal information or sensitive information you may have access to. And again, remember the definition of it under the Washington statute. It's a name plus one or more of the following data sets: an SSN, a driver's license, or a financial account with a means to access the account. Payment card industry information, health information possibly, or confidential agency data. Now, you may not need to know this. This is primarily for information technology personnel, but where is it kept? Are the services or servers or devices on site? Are they, is the information maintained in the cloud? Is it on laptops, mobile phones, portable media? Do we have paper records as well as the digital records? But you need to know where it's kept in order to know how to protect it. And if it, in fact, it is within your control or not, is it encrypted? Who has access to it? And then oftentimes you get real good at protecting it, but do you think about how long you retain it? You should never have any digital or paper sensitive information in your environment any longer than you need it for legitimate business purposes or regulatory purposes. So identify what those are and make sure you've got data retention policies, record retention policies, and destroy the information when it's no longer needed for legitimate business purposes. What about protecting access to sensitive data through password management? Even though you're not information security folks, think about what you could do to secure your information through password management. They should always be 12 characters or more. They should change every 90 days. If it's someone attempts to access your account unsuccessfully, they should be locked out. Just like you, when you miss you've got the fat-fingered problem that sometimes people have, and you hit your password the wrong 1, 2, or 3 times, actually that should lock you out of the account, because bad guys will do the same, and we need to have good security. And never share your password with anyone. You should never have any unauthorized devices on a network, and otherwise protect access to your own computer. When you're not using your computer, after a short period of time, it should actually lock, and the password should be required to reactivate it. You should encrypt all your data on storage devices. So to the extent that you have policies that allow you to copy information onto portable storage devices, they should always be encrypted. And if you do surf the web from your work computer, do it very, very cautiously. And if you're downloading anything from the internet, make sure you know exactly where you are, why you're there, and what you're doing. And ultimately, lock sensitive documents and materials in a file cabinet if, in fact, we're talking about hard copy stuff, or if we're leaving a building at night, make sure everything's locked. Oftentimes, it's you do the best you can to keep the bad guys out, but you need to make it hard for them. If, in fact, you've got devices and paperwork laying on open desks, a bad guy, all he needs to see is it through the window in the middle of the night and kicks in or breaks the window, steals your stuff. So if nothing else, at least make it hard for the bad guys to find. And it's much harder if, in fact, you can put things in locked file cabinets. Dispose of sensitive materials appropriately. I don't know how many times I've dealt with breaches where somebody failed to shred paper documents. They thought they were doing something good by recycling tax information or something else, but the bad guys simply took the paperwork and then filed false tax returns on behalf of in somebody else's name because the information wasn't shredded. Make sure you never share your access key or your fob. And always pay attention to people in your building. Even though it may not be your personal responsibility, if you see somebody you don't recognize, it's always good to be friendly and ask who they are, if they need any assistance. And oftentimes it's going to be just a friendly person who is there for the right reason, and they actually will appreciate the fact that you reach out to them. Periodically, it's going to be somebody who doesn't belong there, and you can escort them right out. But always report incidents and suspicious activities. And as you've heard recently, if you see something, say something. If you're not in information technology, you may not know much about things called security policies. But you want to ask, as an employee, how do they apply to you? Are there things you should know? The reality is your information security will be much, much stronger with those policies, be written down for a purpose and followed by information technology personnel. But you as an employee should also be aware of them so that it will guide you about how to best secure information and to make sure you're in compliance with them. Now, I've talked a bit about social engineering. Social engineering is a process by which thieves are able to manipulate otherwise good people. It's the art of human hacking. Where a hack can be thought of as an attack on information systems, social engineering is actually an attack on people. It's the art of human hacking. And everybody's susceptible to it, whether it's a CEO, director, manager, employee, everybody is vulnerable. Everybody has fallen victim to it. And it can occur through online communication, email communication, telephonic communication, maybe even in-person communication. I've just recently handled a very large breach where the pattern of behavior was that once containment efforts were successful and the bad guys were literally locked out of a system, the malicious actors would come in either by email or by telephone to try to socially engineer employees proposing as legitimate information technology personnel or others to get access to the system. So it can occur in all types of means, and very responsible people regularly fall victim to it. So you have to be very, very aware of it. Now, one of the things you can do to reduce the incidence of social engineering effectiveness is to stop and verify the authenticity of emails before replying. If you receive an email from somebody you don't recognize, quite frankly, you probably shouldn't open it up or respond to it. If somebody needs to get a hold of you, they can call you. If, in fact, somebody's requesting sensitive information or payment, confirm face-to-face that, in fact, the person that you thought it was requesting in fact did. Or pick up the telephone and call a known number of one of your personnel to confirm that, in fact, they actually sent that request to you. Oftentimes, it's bad guys who are impersonating people that you perceive that you know and asking for sensitive information when, in fact, it has not been requested by your colleagues. And anytime you think a question is unusual, verify it with your management, your supervisor, to make sure that whomever that was that asked you for that information really was, in fact, the person that did so. Don't open email from unknown sources. Don't open suspicious, unsolicited emails especially. And so, and this is not as I'm saying be real paranoid, don't do online banking. I do all my banking online, but I initiate communication with an online source that I know is reputable. I do not respond to emails that I don't recognize. And what I believe is that if somebody really does want to get a hold of me, they will contact me by telephone or some other legitimate means. And verify that links and documents and emails are legitimate before opening. And oftentimes what you can do is just hover your cursor over that link, that website link, and what you'll find is oftentimes if it's malicious, it'll actually have a different URL than what it appears to you in clear text. And the reality is if you don't know for sure, then ask. Don't be pushed or bullied or intimidated, or don't allow somebody to give you their sense of urgency about responding to a request for sensitive information or for the transfer of money. Take a deep breath, step back, and ask somebody else whether it's really legitimate. If it's somebody, your manager, anybody else in your agency, all they're going to do is express appreciation for the fact that you actually did your due diligence to make sure that the information that was sought was truly from a legitimate source. Ransomware is one of those social engineering attacks that can occur, and as I mentioned before, bad guys will send an email, an employee may open it up, and it will encrypt everything that's attached to their device. What you want to do immediately if that happens, call your IT personnel, and then they will disable all the network share to stop the spreading. Similarly, with regard to the fraudulent money transfers, make sure you confirm that the request is authorized. So if your CFO or accounting supervisor is asking you for information, walk down the hall or pick up the phone and call just to make sure they in fact actually did request and that it is authorized. Double check email addresses. I would encourage every agency to have a multi-person approval if you're actually writing a certain threshold amounts of money or wire transferring. But ultimately, slow down, be suspicious of any request for confidentiality because that's typically a red flag that it's a illegitimate request. Only you can prevent social engineering. It's really up to you as a human firewall to be aware of common social engineering techniques, and it's critical in spotting the difference between legitimate requests by customers, coworkers, and superiors, and attempts by thieves to gain unauthorized access to your agency's data, resources, or money. And regardless of the technical information security controls that are in place, and you have some tremendous information technology personnel in your agencies, I've met many of them, the reality is social engineering can cause catastrophic consequences because that's the way the bad guys will get into the system if they're shut out by technical means. So it's really critical for you to think before you click. And don't forget about that old standby, that thing that we now don't use so much called the telephone. When in doubt, call somebody. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and look forward to crossing paths down the road.
Thanks so much, Sean. That was a great presentation. Hey, I had a question about social engineering and just privacy in general. So you mentioned that in the Washington State data breach notification statute that what constituted the personal private information. And I was wondering, just one more time, that's personal information, and what is that one?
It's a great question. Most states have very similar definitions, and it's usually defined as foundationally the first name or first initial and the last name combined with one or more data sets. In the state of Washington, it's that first name or initial and last name combined with either a social security number or a driver's license or state ID card number or a financial account with the means to access the account. And the financial account can be a bank account, it could be a mortgage account, it could be your credit card account, but any one of those three additional data sets plus your name, so SSN, driver's license, or a financial account with the means to access it, constitutes personal information under the Washington State Data Breach Notification Statute.
Great. Thanks for going back over that again with me. And then the other question that I had, I just want to touch on it. So if I have that kind of information, say, in my payroll system, and that means I would have their full name, I have their address, and I have their social security number. If my payroll system gets breached, anybody in my payroll system would be part of that breach notification, even if they have moved away and that now they're in Alabama. Is that right?
Absolutely. And one of the challenges for you is, say they move to Massachusetts. Massachusetts has a unique data breach notification statute. They don't allow you to tell their consumers things that the other 46 states do. So that's true, and I've handled a lot of what we call W-2 image exploits, where bad guys will pose as finance managers, and you think your superior is asking for something they have a right to have access to, and so you zip up the W-2 images and send it to that person, but it's really not your colleague. It's somebody in the dark web. And in that case, regardless of where that person resided when they worked for you, you now have to figure out where they reside and then provide notification under the statute of that state.
So it seems like in Washington, one of the most successful ways that data breaches have happened is when people send email, the phishing emails to individuals that really do have something to do with their job. So say they're there to process customer service complaints, and the email says, I have a customer service complaint, please open this PDF to read my corresponding documents, and this person responds to that because that's what they do, is respond to customer service complaints, and boom, they got whatever that particular bad guy wants them to have. So is there ways to really look at those emails and decide whether they're appropriate emails or not?
Yeah, and I want to take this, and there's a couple layers there. First has to do with the social engineering. I do what we call tabletop exercises for organizations, where I come in and I'll actually create 4 or 5 plausible scenarios that will likely occur to your system, and then you as an organization will decide how to respond to it. And oftentimes one of the things I will do, though, is I will have a social engineering exploit. So I'll actually identify an employee without any prior notice to the organization as to what I'm doing or who I'm going to identify, but I will find out a lot about that employee through their Facebook account, their LinkedIn account, some other social networking account. And I'll actually come up with an email that inevitably they will open up because they think it's specifically directed to them. Maybe they were an athlete on a team, and the message has to do with a former teammate who now has a health concern, and there's a charitable auction for this former teammate. This may be a complete ruse that I just made up, but because I know that they played on a certain team at a certain college in a certain time, I can also identify who they played with and come up with a message like that, and inevitably they will click on that PDF, which will ultimately lock down their systems. Now, so that's the first thing, is just be aware that any information you have out there on the internet, the bad guys have access to it as well. But beyond that, in terms of attachments, your information technology personnel should be reading alerts from your vendors with regard to your software to make sure your patches are regularly done. Some are more difficult to deploy than others, but oftentimes that's going to identify the malware associated with certain Adobe products or Word products, because there are certain macros in those products that certain patches can actually pick up. So it's not incumbent upon the employee to identify malware. That's almost impossible. But it's the patches in your system oftentimes will pick that up. But your information technology personnel need the resources to make sure your systems are properly patched, and that's one big way. And sometimes too, certain products and certain attachments are simply blocked appropriately. And then if somebody actually wants to send you something, they can contact you, be unblocked for the purpose of providing you that information, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or a Word macro. But oftentimes some of those things carry viruses, and so they might actually be blocked from systems to start out.
Well, great. Thanks, Sean. Thanks so much. And I assume if anybody has questions, we can try and get a hold of you. Your email address was right on the front page here at seanhoare@dwt.com. And thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Bye.